Hello, this is Alex Birkett, and you are listening to the Long Game Podcast. This episode is a part of our Kitchen Side series, where we pull back the curtain and show you the behind-the-scenes conversations, debates, strategies, and brainstorming sessions that we have at our agency. In this one, we covered the increasingly noisy and chaotic landscape around AI search, or if you will, GEO and AEO, from unproductive debates about definitions to the rise again of spammy short-term tactics flooding the ecosystem. We dug into how companies are choosing what prompts to track and often getting that wrong, why attribution and measurement are still incredibly messy, and how teams are optimizing for visibility without tying it back to revenue or pipeline. We also spent a lot of time talking about brand and positioning and trust, and how AI search compresses information into answers, why sentiment and narrative control matter more than ever, and how off-page signals like reviews, Reddit, and PR are shaping outcomes. Along the way, we also talked about the tension between experience and experimentation, the risks facing larger brands, and why, despite all the automation, human judgment and peer validation still remain a critical role in decision-making. So without further ado, here is the Long Game Podcast. It's a noisy ecosystem right now. That's something I wanted to talk about in the podcast. I put a couple notes down. I feel like the GEO or AEO conversation the last few weeks has gotten dumber in my feeds, at least. Like when I'm looking at X and LinkedIn, I don't know if you felt the same, or maybe I'm just more like jaded at this point.
What are you seeing?
So a few different trends. First off, definitely this constant insular debate on like, is it SEO? Is it the same thing? Is it different? Is it completely different? Is it overlapped? What percentage overlap? Is chunking necessary? Like,
yeah, that's what I'm seeing too.
We've talked about this before, and this is kind of the nerds table or the kids table conversation. And it's just like, you can mire yourself away. You can waste all of this time debating these things, and ultimately that there's no value created from that. The other side is actually more sort of like, I think, depressing to me. I think like it's gotten like spam has always existed, but I feel like AEO spam has gotten like very mainstreamed in a way where like I've always loved kind of scrappy marketing and scrappy tactics and creative stuff. Like I read a book a long time ago that talked about Richard Branson and how he would do like these PR stunts. And I was in like high school and I read it and I was like, oh, that's cool. Like that's how I would want to do marketing. But there was always some veneer of like, we're creating value and we're doing things in, you know, a above board ethical way. And there's these communities that, I used to go to this meetup in Austin called Internet Marketing Party. And I don't know if it's still running, but it's basically all those people who make like info products and sell you on like ClickFunnels and direct response kind of stuff. And you know, 2% of those people are like good people, and then 98% are just absolute scum. Like they're the people who like, you know, advertise on porn sites and like sell like how to get rich, how to get laid guides, like that type of thing. And they kind of operated underneath the surface for a long time, although they're connected to some bigger players who are well known, like kind of Tony Robbins is associated with some of this stuff. And it's an interesting rabbit hole. But I've seen a lot of these people and these tactics get pulled into AEO probably because it's a gold rush right now. And it's like there's no...
Like their websites are being cited, you mean?
No. So it's like the same type of people and the same type of tactics and conversation and just general like kind of moral positioning towards marketing that I used to see in those groups. Now I see some small contingency, granted, it's not the mainstream, but like some small contingency of like new AEO agencies and just like the way people are talking about tactics is very much like a sort of, you know, somebody's going to do it, so fuck them. Like I'll do it. You know, it's like very much like a cynical, like just get your money kind of thing, you know?
Yeah. And get out before
So I'm seeing a lot more of that.
Get out before the charts go down to the right, because they eventually will.
Exactly. Yeah. And
yeah, I had a...
Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, like, I'm hearing more and more of people wanting to produce a lot of content with AI and just like, they call it programmatic, and we've already had a discussion about that. But there was one client or a prospect I spoke with yesterday. I'm like, it sounds like you are very much intent on producing hundreds of thousands of pages for SEO, and I'm not going to be able to change your mind. And they're like, Yes. And you're asking me where to prioritize, but you're going to produce all of it anyway. So what's the point of prioritization? It was a really interesting conversation, and I ended up thinking that they're not going to be a good fit anyway based on that conversation. But it's just interesting how they're like leaning in on all of that. And I told them, like, you're bringing in 100,000 views from the pages you have produced, and you get 3 low quality demos a month, and you're still going to do this? I was very confused about, like, wait, what are you optimizing for?
Yeah, what was their why?
They said they wanted to get more conversions. And I said, well, if this is generating, I don't know what the math is on that 0.003% conversion rate, why would you keep doing that for?
They're trying to retrofit a solution into a problem, essentially. They've already decided what they want to do, and they're just trying to backfit it into a goal.
You have to wonder.
I think,
I was just going to say, you have to wonder, like, it seems like some people have a good grasp, not just from a knowledge perspective, but from like a patient's perspective. I think we've talked a couple times in these sessions of like not flailing and not changing your strategy or your approach like month over month, because it's pretty easy to do that. And I think some of this work, as most marketing work does, it takes time to see results and to pivot and iterate and just patience. And then it seems like some people, partially to your point, David, they're either like so adamant about something that doesn't make sense, or they are listening, or they're falling victim to the people that you talked about, Alex. And I'm like, you have to wonder, like, is it, and this is rhetorical, but is it leadership? Is it the way they've curated their online community and the voices that they've listened to? Like, is it a failure to like pressure test like who they subscribe to on Substack? Like, you have to wonder if people aren't questioning where they're getting their information, or if they feel so much pressure from their leadership. I don't know the answer here, but it just baffles me. Some of these folks that have been in marketing for 10, 15, 20 years, and it's like this one thing that has kind of put a crack right down the middle of what we saw as success online, but it's got people scrambling. It's wild. Like, I didn't know this stuff would still be all over my LinkedIn feed because it was a year ago, right?
I have a couple hypotheses on that. Mm-hmm. I do think that by and large, it's a product of our media ecosystem or social media ecosystem. We could dive down that rabbit hole if you want, but I've talked to, what I want to say is I don't want to blame the operators. I've talked to VCs and PE firms who have told me like the biggest value we can add right now is just upstream education, because essentially like first marketers, head of marketing, CMOs, CEOs, they don't know what to do. They know AEO is like this big thing that everybody's talking about, but you have some portion of people saying like you need to craft like extremely high quality, proprietary data. You have to like bake it with all this like subject matter expert quotes and like rich media and like, really prune these so it's like the perfect asset. And then you have the far end of the other side saying like, no, just autopilot, publish 1,000 pages a week. And it's hard to parse signal from the noise. And then I think the other thing on AEO is I've been pondering this. So you see all these like very broad, very large data set studies that talk about citations and how often domains or URLs are cited against a set of prompts. And there's this problem that occurs with big data in that it becomes a sort of like, the sky is filled with stars, and you can kind of connect a string of stars and see a constellation. So if you have enough stars, you can kind of make any constellation you want. You can make a snake, you can make a cow, you can make a horse, you can make anything if you have enough stars. So because these data sets are so big, and there's so many different companies putting out data sets, and nobody really knows what set of prompts they're tracking and if it's even apples to apples over time, I think you can prove anything you want to prove. Mm-hmm. Like, I think you like whatever your point of view is and whatever service you sell, whether it's high scale, air ops style, like optimization at scale, whether it's digital PR and media outreach and syndication, whether it's LinkedIn. LinkedIn's a big citation source now. Everybody's talking about it. Reddit, like you can kind of sell the narrative based on the data now. So I think that's a huge problem, actually. Because like, what do you do if your job entails like 6 different other things, like hiring?
Yeah, and like everyone has data-backed reasons for why their approach is, I mean, even us.
Yeah. Well, and now like you as a head of marketing at a Series D startups, you got to figure out how to like operationalize AI agents in your programs and like vibe code on the side in addition to doing all the stuff you were supposed to be doing anyway. Yeah. So are you going to take the time to sit down and really hash out the methodology of the latest study? Like, so I think those two components play into this big time. It's hard to know what is right, what is wrong, what is up and down. And that comes into play with these like kind of, gray hat, black hat actors that you could take advantage of that chaotic ecosystem.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I had a few things to bring up that are, for people who don't always listen, might feel new. To us, it's going to feel repetitive. But I had a friend reach out to me. I used to work with her back when I was at People AI. And she's like, hey, my team's starting to do stuff around like GEO, AEO. Can you just like hop on a call with them? I'm like, yeah, sure. Let's chat. Like send me whatever you're already working on. And there were a couple things that stood out to me from that conversation. One was the way they were doing measurement was really interesting. I know we've talked about like self-report attribution as like a good input. They actually, another agency they work with did this. I remember I did a search for their website. I clicked on a link from Google and it automatically appended UTM parameters to the page. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh, that's odd. What happens if I click a link here? I clicked the link and it reappended the UTM parameters again. I'm like, oh, that's a no-no. And yeah, I need to ask why they did this. And I learned that part of it was because they wanted to like trace traffic down to funnel. And I explained why this is probably screwing up their GA analytics. And they're like, oh yeah, we did see like traffic doubled since we made that update. I'm like, yeah, you're going to want to check on that. I can't believe this agency did that for you. I don't know why they even do that for. They clearly don't think about analytics, even though they set up analytics. But the interesting thing was they used those parameters to then try to retrofit whether a lead that came through was from an LLM. So it was like, hey, we saw that this came from an LLM somehow. And then we looked at the keywords at that page that they converted on rank 4. And we looked at the prompts that we were tracking. And it was like, oh, that keyword kind of maps to this prompt. And I was like, so it sounds like you don't actually have data. I'm like,
that's worse than why don't you ask? Honestly, that's pretty bad.
Yeah. I said, why don't you just ask on the forum how they heard about you? And they're like,
or ask in the demo call. Huh? Tell me about your discovery journey.
Yeah,
like,
we're asking the demo call.
Even if it's not perfect, it's better than that.
But it kind of got me back to Alex. We talked about this when we were with Nick in New York for a pod of people were like sitting behind a keyboard and trying to like do all this stuff in the background without just like talking to someone or going directly to the source. Because I also asked, hey, you have Peak set up and you have like 100 prompts. How'd you decide on the prompts? And they said, well, we did some keyword research and we used those and we thought about what people might be searching. And we talked to the product marketing team and asked, how does a product marketing team come up with what people's pain points are? And then I got another explanation. I said, have you listened to sales calls? And it was like an epiphany moment to them. So I know to us, it feels quite obvious to just go straight to the source and hear from them and what they're doing. But I think for a lot of folks, it's trying to find data in other ways rather than just going to the source, which I have trouble understanding that. And maybe maybe there's guardrails of whether they can talk to a client or get access to those sales call recordings. But I'm finding it's very valuable to educate folks on those things still.
Yeah, I'm going to read between the lines on your story there, and there's kind of a deeper issue that I've been thinking about. So the analytics thing is something that's like settled. Like that's one of those things that if you've been around for 10 or 20 years, you kind of see that right away, and you're like, okay, it's going to double count sessions. Also, why are you appending UTM parameters from a Google search? Like it's going to attach the parameters anyway. Like you're doing redundant things. Like. But anyway, so there's sort of like this valuing experience. So people who have been there, done that, kind of know what to do. And then there's this new paradigm, which is some people think that, if you have a lot of experience, that might actually be weighing you down because you don't know how to kind of break free of those previous paradigms. And metaphorical chains and kind of think in the new way, like AI agents, AEO, et cetera, et cetera. So maybe some old SEO paradigms are causing people to say, it's just SEO. I'm not going to try the new stuff. And you're a little curmudgeonly. So there's two sides of this spectrum. Lily Ray talks a lot about the former. So the AEO people advocating very sort of like sketchy plays. And let's just say like the mass scale content creation, like that's the easiest one to discuss, but there's many of these. If you've been in SEO for a decade or more, you know how that story plays out, right? And because there's such an intertwining of search indices with at least RAG generated LLM responses, like if you nuke your presence in search, you're going to harm your presence in AI search too. So having been there and seen that, an SEO person is going to be like, we shouldn't probably do that, right? Whereas an AEO person with zero experience, they might have the sort of proactive alacrity to say, like, let's try something new, but they might risk it in pursuit of that. Same with the analytics stuff, right? If you've had sort of like a longer arc of experience, you're going to know those certain things, but maybe there is a case, to sort of break free of some of those previous attribution models, thinking, I have to track all these clicks. I have to track everything from a UTM source, from a channel perspective. Mm-hmm. And now, there's a different set of metrics. So there's sort of a tension between those two worlds. That's something I've noticed.
Yeah. On the analytics thing too, it is interesting looking at all the parallels between SEO and AEO around people continue to only talk about visibility and citation share, which is important to have a seat at the table. And I rarely hear prospects saying, we want to generate revenue in pipeline from LLMs. Like everyone's just talking about that first layer of visibility. And I know, Alex, you referenced like the traffic trap a little bit a couple times. And I keep telling them, hey, I know you want visibility and it sounds like you're just going after these very popular, what you think are popular prompts still. And that's probably not going to drive revenue for you. And I do pull up some of the original research that Kate had done around like vendors and products might get recommended for these types of prompts, but less often than for prompts that have like a job to be done or a pain point associated with it. And there's the trying to find some scalable solution to be able to understand pipeline influence versus there have been a couple prospects where I say, this might just be messy for now. Like you kind of just have to dig into the data and like work on like manually attributing and like seeing the open text field saying that they found you from ChatGPT or whatever, and then using that to communicate like that ChatGPT influence pipeline. There isn't like, to my knowledge, there isn't any clean tooling available for any of this.
Yeah. Are you talking about like the popular prompts as being like mainstream head keywords, like informational stuff that might have a lot of search volume and then kind of translating that to a prompt? Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think like the setup, I actually kind of like that you can set up your own prompts versus just track keywords that already have kind of historical data associated with them. Mm-hmm. Because then you can build a customized approach to your marketing and your kind of digital presence. The way I look at that, I actually think visibility is awesome. Like I love tracking that. I think it's a good mirror for your digital presence. Not just visibility, but sort of like distribution of your citation sources across different prompt sets to showcase your influence and your sentiment and how you're spoken about and like how your positioning kind of changes over time. So if your marketing goals are around influencing upstream narratives, like if that's the problem set you're trying to solve, I could see that being interesting. If you're just sort of trying to approximate the old SEO world of hey, this is going to be high volume, it's going to generate clicks, via somebody clicking a citation source, which who fucking does that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Then it's like you're solving the wrong problem. But I don't think it's like necessarily good or bad. Everybody's got their own methodology around this stuff, but I tend to like more of the bottom of the funnel and kind of comparison and like when somebody's in that kind of buying stage, because that's the problem we try to solve for. But for enterprises, it might make sense. I don't know.
Yeah. I think for enterprise it makes sense. The context for this, the person I was speaking to, they work at a company that's like, they have a list of 5,000 accounts that are the only accounts they want to go after that makes sense to use their product. And I'm like, I bet you a chief legal officer is now searching for what is contract automation.
Probably not.
That's probably not going to be the thing that convinces them to use your product. Maybe someone who's like not aware of it. But I think knowing that these companies don't change like products very often, you probably want to catch someone in a buying cycle, not just learning about that concept. But yeah, I think depending on the maturity of the company, I agree.
The thing that scares me about the GEO is SEO notion, and it's a Venn diagram, but there are so many opportunities that would not even begin to perform in traditional search that could completely change performance in AI search. You think of the same example like a legal officer, like hopefully they know what contract automation is if they're in that role. But they're probably looking for, I actually don't exactly know how to line this up with your example, but like XYZ tool for companies with 50 or fewer people with this use case, with this pain point, with this blah, blah, like long prompt. Like, I mean, I don't know. Everyone uses LLMs differently. I kind of like tell it my life story. Like, I'm like, the more I give it, the more it can help me and it'll jump right to the chase. First of all, there's not a keyword to match that. Second of all, there's so much nuanced content that probably first won't even mirror like an SEO blog post that would help this brand show up in this conversation. Not just show up, but show up correctly. Because that's the other thing is like the larger companies that we work with, even if they haven't been investing in GEO, I would suspect they're probably part of the conversation just by nature of being around for the last 20 years. They're on G2, they're on the listicles. Like when I was building content at HubSpot, I threw a bunch of brands into my content when I was looking at examples or competitors because they were just out in the world. So I'm making an assumption, but I would suspect companies that are classically enterprise are probably, they want to defend their visibility. They're not trying to get visible. Their issue is positioning and sentiment. And that's a very specific, pointed, nuanced strategy that oftentimes will not show results on Ahrefs or show results even through traffic. I was working on a project last year. The whole engagement traffic was going down and down and down. But we 2.5x our ROI because I was paying attention to like where the knowledge gaps were in AI search, where the positioning was inaccurate, how they were being compared to their biggest incumbents. And we created and optimized content to contribute to that story that in our roadmaps was not mapped to a keyword. And those helped, when we would double check a month or 2 or 3 months later, the answers were what we wanted to see. And the results were reflected in the sales calls. Folks would come to demos ready to buy. They weren't asking questions because of, LLMs were giving them the wrong information. So it's just an interesting thing. I think a lot of people just forget that there's people on the other side of this. It was just a scary first principle to forget, but that's where SEO and GEO are just never going to be the same.
That's a crazy cool point. Something that I emphasize in our pitches, I guess I shouldn't give the whole secret sauce away, but it's hard to build. So whatever. So a lot of the times, like SEOs, like just purebred SEOs, like they're going to care about like things in isolation, like technical components of the website and keywords and whatever. And all of that is important. But to me, it's downstream of the business acumen. And in some fundamental sense, like how does SEO, how does AI search fit into your customer journey and your go-to-market model? Like that's a question we ask before we kind of generate strategies, blueprints, roadmaps, content playbooks, whatever you want to call it. And in some cases, like this old SaaS model of like, you drive a bunch of traffic, you get, ultimate guides, how-tos, comparisons, you sort of map through the top of the funnel, middle funnel, bottom of the funnel. Some percentage of those, download a gated asset or request a demo. That works for a lot of brands. Like that's one model of how SEO plays into go-to-market. But in this case, right, you've got a limited TAM. You've probably got a high ACV product. You've probably got a few competitors. It's probably not overly expansive, right? It's not going to be something like no-code, low-code automation tools where you've got like a million of them. And there's only a few sort of entry points to categorical awareness. So I could imagine that a large part of the go-to-market is going to be very curated in-person events, conferences, potentially original research and white papers around the problem, given it's a finite set of people who are going to be thinking about that problem, some targeted outreach. And then where does SEO, or where does AI search fit into that? It's what Allie said. A lot of information that wouldn't have any keyword volume associated with it. Like that's a client that 10 years ago, if we were in business 10 years ago, I would have turned away because there's no way to make SEO work. But now I'm like, okay, that's actually a really interesting AI search problem. So I see that as being a big differentiator as well. And you talked about tactics too. I mentioned content on your own site, but like all the off-page stuff. Like there's so many interesting ways you can kind of effectuate visibility and product marketing and positioning within that kind of consideration set once you identify where the customer is actually looking for information.
Yeah, I presented at a webinar for a client a month ago. I don't know. Just about GEO and our frameworks and how to turn it into tactics. I think a lot of people, as I'm sure you all know, are like, I know this thing. What do I do with all this information? But I was putting together the story I was telling, and the language I was using was, LLMs don't just retrieve information. They interpret it, they summarize it, and they compress it into one answer. And a lot of people, even marketers that know what's happening behind the scenes, take that as gospel. They don't challenge it. They don't even know how to look at the citation list. They don't go double check their work. Maybe they do in the sense of they call a friend, a trusted friend, or, run through other comparison articles or ask people on LinkedIn, kind of the same data that Kate looked into, Alex, in terms of like how do B2B decision makers make their decisions. But oftentimes folks they're busy, life is noisy. Your point about media and social media is like, they just want to get to like, go from 0 to 1 and then gut check that 1 and then, book a couple calls, have conversations. Like it's that compression of the answer that's scary, and that's where it's like visibility. Yeah, I get that that's a real challenge for a lot of clients. That's more about foundations folks, people trying to like establish a hold in the market. But the larger companies that ironically seem to be having a large majority of the trouble with this right now, their name's already out there. It's more of like, where is that information coming from? What's the positioning that LLMs are telling about your brand? Because as a buyer, I have my answer set. I chat a little bit more. Okay, well, which one of these tools can do X, or which one of these tools has this integration? Like you're running through LLMs for all of that evaluation and consideration. And so it's like, it's just let me just get on the LLMs. Let's just boost my visibility. Let me just make sure I'm mentioned. It's the lack of how am I mentioned? How am I talked about? How am I compared? That more people should be asking this. That's my advice to those listening. Or, lean on us and we'll dig into that too. Because to me, visibility is literally just step one. It's not going to ensure that jump to pipeline and revenue, like you said, David. Like LLMs are like your best BDR. If your BDR was just trying to get your name out there, like they're probably not going to close a lot of deals or book a lot of meetings. So it's the sentiment and positioning side of things that I'm really into right now.
Yeah, well, and your visibility, I believe, is strongly correlated with your branded search volume and your brand awareness. So there's all kinds of tactics you can run to kind of like game visibility in the early days. Like you can publish a bunch of listicles and comparison pages, but I feel like those get wiped out after a month or two because your competitors do the same, and then everything's equalized. And ultimately, kind of brand is the defining factor for how visible you are. But the sentiment stuff's crazy. I think I don't want to go too into detail here because I think you don't want to talk about like these things and give anybody ideas, but there's a lot of attack vectors, I think, for large brands on the sentiment side of things now. And that's because of a couple different mechanisms. AI search sort of obfuscates like domains and bylines away. So there's less skin in the game. Do with that what you will, but you could imagine like a bad actor spinning up websites that aren't attached to their name and publishing content about your brand, right? So there's a defensive play with some of this stuff, just due to many different kind of technological changes, like easier ability to create content with AI, like AI search obfuscating different kind of aspects of you, like who's writing this stuff. So it's important, especially because bigger players are going to be, more targeted for those things, because small players can kind of use that to like siphon off credibility from bigger players. Maybe that was part of SEO for what some people would do, but I feel like that's kind of a new, I mean, it's definitely related to PR, but it's very different, I think, now.
Yeah, it's like GEO is verging more on ORM online reputation management than anything else. Like, I think if there was a synonym for it, that's what it would be.
Totally.
Because in AI search, like, you don't own the narrative around your brand. You can contribute to it a bit. You know, your content can get cited in sources, and you can certainly create content that helps increase visibility, but you're not owning the lion's share of how your brand is talked about anymore. And I know a lot of brands, especially the larger ones, I mean, we just spoke with one today, is legal teams involved, hesitant to mention competitors. Like, there's a lot of ways around that. To me, it's just a matter of connecting those dots for LLMs that your brand is associated or competitive to or alternative to other brands. You don't have to come in swinging. But then, you know, if you have these smaller listicles or these smaller articles that are mentioning less than positive feedback and they link to a real review, can't do anything about that. That's their source material right there. Mm-hmm. If their claims are out of nowhere, obviously it's a different ballgame. But that kind of goes back to review management and profiles and all of that stuff. It's a very interesting landscape.
It's such an interesting dynamic because the bigger companies that you had mentioned, Alex, that may be more likely to be targeted are the ones kind of being handcuffed, like handcuffing themselves because their legal team is like, no, you can't write anything about competitors, where the competitors are, I mean, it's something SEO with the competitive content, but for whatever reason with using AI to produce more of that content and influencing LLMs, you can do it a lot more quickly. And you're right, Alex, like remove the byline and all of a sudden there's no accountability, or it's a lot more difficult to trace it back. And now it's less of a, hey, your competitors are going to own a narrative, and more of, you got to protect your brand, which, yeah, of course, goes into more like brand marketing or even PR. I was speaking to like PR candidates, and they're talking a lot about how like a lot more clients are coming to them because of GEO and how they want to show up in LLM outputs. So I'm glad folks are thinking about it, not just like going to an SEO agency, but also thinking about it from a bigger brand perspective.
Yeah, as they should be. Yeah, it's interesting. It's like it's kind of classic 48 laws of power because the big companies, you know, the David and Goliath story. I think Malcolm Gladwell kind of like talked about it in his book, David and Goliath. I think that was the book title, where David was actually not disadvantaged because Goliath was actually like blind and like lumbering and slow or something like that. So like if like smaller players have less to lose, it's kind of all upside for the most part for them. And there's a lot to lose for big brands. So it's actually a pretty pernicious kind of situation for them. What I would be thinking about is sort of building moats and kind of building a robust presence of your own that kind of crowds out any of that nonsense. And that gets into the tactics. And I think a lot of that is off page. A lot of it's on page, you know, just having great product documentation and product marketing and feature pages and all of that, really clearly explaining who you're for. I don't think we need to feed that fed horse anymore. We've talked about that a lot. But on the off page side, the big thing now is, well, surround sound SEO, circa 2018 HubSpot. You get mentioned on comparison pages and listicles. You know, that soon is going to be quite saturated because the outreach is going to exceed the inventory. And then it's going to be basically arbitrage through basically a new affiliate model. So who can pay the most, which, you know, your larger brands are usually going to have an advantage there. So I'd be looking into the next layer of sort of what's harder to, you know, what has a higher barrier to entry or what has a higher barrier of trust, because that's usually what the platforms will filter for after, you know, they realize there's a loophole that people are exploiting, causing shitty search results or shitty AI results. Usually they're going to try to close that loophole and make something that's harder to fake. So that's what I've been thinking a lot about, is kind of what are those, you know, Horizon 2, Horizon 3 things that are less likely to be, you know, polluted tragedy of the commons, because, you know, anybody can just kind of make fake Reddit accounts and post on Reddit or whatever.
Yeah, I think it's related to what you're talking about, Alex. But even with all these tools, like AirOps has an automated outreach thing for GEO and brand mentions, and I think the other one is Noble. And I'm sure a lot of these outreach tools that were for link building are probably repositioning to support GEO as well. And if it's the same pages getting hit up over and over again, does it just turn to affiliate, or does it just become like not influential anymore in some ways?
I think both could happen. Yeah. Well, I don't think it's bad. Like, there's no net negative to being mentioned on these pages, right? So I do think it's still warranted to do the outreach, whether it's automated or manual. Ultimately, it kind of comes down to the incentive that you're willing to offer somebody. So it's like, it doesn't really matter if it's an automated outreach email. It's kind of like, do you have an affiliate program? Do you have a place on your blog or your podcast where, my founder can come, get in front of your audience or something like that. So I don't think there's a net negative there. I could see it being less influential in AI search. I mean, that's subject to change. I think your citation sources and even what ranks in Google search could be altered.
Those change.
Yeah. But then, I don't know, there's more robust places too. Like, I think the review sites are, for all their flaws, I think there is a higher barrier to entry there. There's usually a human review. You have to, actually have happy customers. So, that in addition to the brand mentions on corporate websites and listicles, I don't know. It'll be interesting once things are sort of equalized and things are priced in, because it's kind of an arbitrage opportunity still at this point.
I think the thing about review sites that I learned last year is they contribute a lot to like the categorization of your product as well.
Yeah.
So how your brand or your product is tagged and categorized on these sites, XYZ software, XYZ tool, 1 or 2 wrong tags can make or break your visibility for someone searching for like top 10x software. Even if your reviews are positive, that was a really interesting learning and a pretty easy tweak to get in there and claim those profiles, make sure all the positioning is consistent. And to go back to what we said about like leveraging PR teams and comms teams. And, we just talked to a prospect who their comms and brand team is already in motion, kind of working on testimonials and reviews and all of that, which is really good. Asking for detail in those reviews, asking for exactly what features are beloved or what parts of the tool helped someone make their decision for them versus a competitor. That all goes back to like Google reviews too, for restaurants and stores and all of that. But it stands, I think, to say about software reviews and how that contributes again to the specifics in AI search.
Wikipedia as well on that front, especially for larger categories and brands within that. I think most of them are naturally going to be included in categorical pages, like a CRM page on Wikipedia probably says something about Salesforce, but making sure that you're included in all of those if you're an enterprise. I think like as a heuristic, anything that has an extra layer of human verification or filtering is probably important to be in. So the review sites are included in that. Wikipedia is definitely in that. Reddit, I think, is, although I kind of go back and forth on Reddit because it does have a little bit more of I don't know. I just see so much spam that's obvious on Reddit and it works. And like everybody's like, oh, it's like hard to break through and like people don't like marketers there. But then I see it and I'm like, nah, it's pretty gameable. So I don't know. I go back and forth on that one. But anyway, like pools, surface areas that have a little bit higher barrier to entry and are influential for customers and also for AI engines, those are probably good places to be. You have thoughts on Reddit? I
do have thoughts on Reddit. I've learned so much about Reddit for the past 6 months. We've evolved our program a couple times now and are working with an awesome consultant. Reddit has improved and increased their spam filters. They've upped their mods. And as a community, like people who just were born and raised on Reddit, they have little to no patience for that bullshit. I've watched it. I've learned it the hard way. And honestly, it was just a matter of time. When Reddit became like such a big part of this conversation, people were like, no, we're not going to I think Reddit's been the most impressive forum to protect exactly what they were built for. Because if you think about all the other social media platforms, like it's just ads every other thing, right? Whereas Reddit, like they have ads and sponsored posts, but genuinely the community is so protective of it being as real and as raw as it can be. But that doesn't mean that companies can't integrate it as a marketing channel. I think that the tactics and the energy with which you approach it needs to change. I've learned a lot about how like branded Reddit accounts, every brand should have one. And it's more of being super like transparent about, hey, I'm Allie at Omniscient. Like coming in, if there's a complaint about my brand or a question about like these two brands, like which one would you guys choose? Don't try to commandeer the conversation or falsely sway it, but just come in and contribute as a commenter on behalf of your company. Doesn't always work. It depends on the subreddit, but that is the direction I think that this is all headed. And I think there's definitely going to be a time and place for pseudonymous posting where it's an account not associated with the brand. But the difference is get your customers to do that. Get your employees to do that. Like have it be done in an authentic way where it still kind of creates this surround sound effect on the platform. But it's not just this like spray and pray kind of energy. And I think that's where a lot of people are having to pivot. And it certainly is something I feel more proud of as an approach. I would feel more proud of as an approach as a marketer. But I think the bringing Reddit to the surface of GEO and AI search and ChatGPT, and it's one of the top citations and blah, blah, blah. The forum, the community has pivoted very quickly to make sure that's not all it's known for.
So I'm like not a huge Reddit fan actually, and I'll just put my bias out there. I used to be a Redditor in like college, but I don't love the community. So those are really great tips for brands and marketers, but like to put on my consumer and like skeptical, hobby journalist hat, who's reviewing the reviewers? Like, is there any system by which you can review who's a subreddit moderator and what their ethics and kind of like criteria for inclusion and exclusion are? Because
like compromised.
We can look at our own citation data and there's like new subreddits that pop up like our top agencies or some bullshit. And they have like these listicles like, oh, the top GEO agencies in 2026. And it's a listicle that, some brand would have posted on their own site, some no-name brand. And it breaks through and it's like, all right, well, if they started that community or if they paid somebody, like who knows, like subreddit I think the big subreddits are probably like a little bit more fortified, but like, I mean, is there any sort of layered system that protects against that? I feel like there's a lot of loopholes is what I'm trying to say. Like I'm a little bit of a skeptic.
I think there still is. I think that's going to be the case no matter what. Every subreddit has its own rules and every subreddit's mods or mod. Some people I'm like, you must just keep your Reddit open all day. Like you're removing posts within 10 minutes, like, which I respect that. Like if you're protecting the community and you have an idea of what works and what people are looking for in that community. There's also like metrics or what's the word I'm thinking of? Like karma points and other indicators on an individual Reddit account that typically communicate like how active, how valuable, how useful, comment to post ratio. If someone's just posting, probably not someone who's like trying to contribute value to the community. Whereas like commenting, engaging in conversation, just like chatting people up, you have some badges, you have some upvotes, like, but that goes back to the I use the word energy, but like, how are you approaching the platform? Are you actually trying to be valuable? Like, I know this sounds simplistic and almost naive, but it can be applied to any of these tactics. Like, are you actually trying to add value? Are you actually engaging in conversation? Are you telling the truth? I know that there's not really a gut check on that. Sometimes it's a matter of trust. But on platform, on Reddit, when you're seeing brands mentioned or people saying, oh yeah, I use that tool for 6 years, I love it. That also goes back to like doing more of your homework, right? And I think Reddit is just one of many sources that people check when they're going down their buying journey. I've actually been surprised at how strong Google has held on to like old threads. I don't know if y'all have seen that, but oftentimes like for key queries, like best this, top that, oftentimes the Reddit or the forum blurb on page one, it's like 6 to 12 months old threads. And I think it's because Google's like, I'm not going to mess with anything new right now. Like I'm going to let the dust settle and I'm going to trust threads that have since been archived. So no one can really add to them. And this was before the whole GEO push. That's my assumption. That's why we haven't been looking at Google as a leading indicator of our on-platform performance because they're not surfacing any new threads right now in Google results. So
I think all of this is a really interesting problem. I think, AI engines are pulling from a multitude of sources and platforms, each of whom have their own dynamics and incentive structures, and ultimately boil down to humans and their incentive structures. And I think, like, in evolutionary biology, evolutionary psychology, one common trope is that, like, if something is metabolically cheap to do, if you can get something for nothing, many people will do that, right? And these platforms will try to, sort of play whack-a-mole and close those loopholes. But there's probably always going to be some sort of inaccurate information or spamming or black hat kind of tactics afoot. And it makes me wonder about this grand vision around, like, agentic everything, making decisions on your behalf, et cetera, et cetera. Because what we see in surveys and what we see in our own research is that typically the top 2 to 4 sources that CMOs and B2B buyers use to make decisions, AI search, AEO, GEO, et cetera, is almost always up there. Classic search is still up there. And then it's pure recommendations. So it's almost always those two, which are sort of two opposite sides of the spectrum, right? One is, like, extremely frictionless, and the other means you have to have friends that you trust and you go text or call or, like, go to a Slack group that you've been invited to. So that tends to be, like, that to me is like the fail-safe. Like, you do some quick cursory research and maybe it is sourcing, some questionable Reddit threads, whatever. But ultimately what I tell myself, and maybe this is just delusion, is that, like, the companies, and they're not even usually companies, they're usually very small players, are kind of running these tactics at scale. It's like Will Reynolds, he talks about, like, real company shit. It's like, that's not real company shit. Like, you're not actually getting recommended by peers at a happy hour, right? So I don't know. In my heart, I still believe that you have to have both to be a successful company over the long term. And maybe even the peer review side or the peer recommendation side is going to grow in importance as more of the digital stuff gets kind of equalized away. I don't know. This is speculation.
Yeah. I mean, even to speak about that from my own experience, I've had numerous occasions now where I'm talking to a prospect and they say, I ran your proposal by another agency we work with or by another CMO. They said they liked it. And so, yes, they found us through ChatGPT or Claude, but there's still for them that fail safe of, I know AI recommended you and that's why you're on my short list, but let me just do my own back channels on you. And, like, I've had clients say, hey, this person reached out to me saying that they're in process with you because they found their logo on our website and they find a person who was probably the person that worked with us, or, like, they found a testimonial on our site. So they're doing their due diligence. And to me, that gives me hope that it's not all just going to be decisions being made by AI and people blindly trusting what these LLM outputs say.
I wouldn't even buy a desk chair without asking somebody's opinion, let alone an expensive agency. God forbid. I hope people aren't just, like, blindly like, oh, they show up in AI search. Cool. Yeah.